Let's go to Mark Richardson.
Thank you, Chair Engelbright, and to Chair Cusick and everyone for their stamina today. It's been, I can say that I've been here since the beginning, and it has been fascinating and I think incredibly informative. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts. And there was much in the previous panel that I think also kind of spills over into my area of expertise, which is community solar, specifically commercial and community solar. Solitude Solar does business as under the trade name of US Light Energy. We're located in Latham, New York. We are one of the largest community solar developers that's located here in the state. And I want to share some thoughts kind of about the state of solar from my perspective as a business owner. And I think there's a lot of good information happening with regard to the pipeline that we have of projects, particularly community solar projects and even the large scale renewable projects. But I'm here to talk about really what's effectively a solar funding cliff. The NYS incentives that we've become accustomed to over the past several years have effectively run out for commercial and industrial solar, including community solar. And right now, as we speak, there is no follow-on program. We're having some discussions about that at the Public Service Commission level and with NYSERDA. And I say we, the public, is having those conversations. Unfortunately, there really is no end game in sight. And as a result of that, the investment community has largely stopped investment in developing solar projects in New York State. This may come as a shock because we have such a robust pipeline of projects, which in fact, my company alone has roughly 600 megawatts of community solar projects in our development pipeline. Unfortunately, we've only been able to act on roughly 10% of that project pipeline, largely due to three factors. And those are what I really want to talk about today, which is the economics of these projects. The other piece of the puzzle is the infrastructure and how do we deploy these resources in a way that's cost effective and is actually good for resiliency and reliability on the grid. And land use, which has been talked about a lot today in a number of different ways. I did submit written testimony, so I'm not going to try and go through every single point, but I would urge everyone to look closely at the Public Service Commission actions that are being taken right now with regard to the environmental value of the value stack. We've spent years coming up with a valuation methodology for renewable energy, which is known as VDER, or Value of Distributed Energy Resources. And the E-value, the environmental value of that is really effectively the only fixed value of that remains. It is, in my opinion, woefully undervalued. If we urge the Public Service Commission to accept the DEC's guidance, where they just came out with the new social cost of carbon at a 2% discount rate, that would dramatically improve the revenues that these projects could generate. Increased revenues means that we can increase our tax payments to our host communities. And I think with responsible land use and siting, we can actually deploy these resources now. In short order, we're ready to go, and we're ready to put lots of megawatts in the ground, frankly, if given the opportunity. Thank you. I'm out of time. I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
I just have a couple questions. Mark, you had mentioned in your testimony, and I just want you to expand a little bit on I think I got it right, solar funding cliff, that we're at a cliff, and that there are no follow-up programs, and particularly there are hurdles when there comes to the economics, the infrastructure, and the land use. Could you just expand a little bit on that? Because I know you and I have spoken about it in the past, but I think it's important for others to hear.
Absolutely, and I appreciate the question, Chair. So the funding cliff that I speak about is that over the past several years, NYSERDA has run an incentive program. It's a capacity-based incentive program. In other words, the projects were paid per DC kilowatt of installed capacity. And that program has run out of money. So the two things I think happened and have happened. One is that the funds, frankly, are in the accounting process are considered expended when they're actually allocated and not actually spent. And we've actually have a significant gap in the resources that have been granted funding allocations versus those resources that have been granted funding allocations and actually built. If you go back and look at NYSERDA's documents, it's roughly 50% of each megawatt block design capacity that's actually been installed to date. And some of those date back 4 and 5 years. I think that is a grave concern. And I think that the capacity-based incentive model has done a good job of creating demand and interest in New York's solar market. But I think that fundamentally it's flawed. Because the revenue side of the equation effectively is incredibly variable. Additionally, the design philosophy of a declining block program is that costs will always continue to be reduced while revenues will always continue to go up. In other words, the price of energy will increase. And it is true, frankly. I want to point this out because this really touches on a lot of the issues that have been raised today about electrical infrastructure, that the cost of electricity in New York, and when you talk about average prices, largely driven by downstate New York City electric prices, and the vast majority of the cost of a kilowatt hour in New York City is due to grid congestion, transmission congestion. The cost of a kilowatt hour in the wholesale market can range anywhere from 2.5 to 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour. That is not tremendously expensive. The remainder of what we pay upstate, which is roughly 10 cents, and I'm rounding numbers here, is all transmission, distribution, and other taxes and fees. That is a real concern, right? We have this funding cliff where the projects are not subsidized in the way that they have been, and we've effectively developed all of this potential infrastructure that we could go deploy, but for the missing economic equation. I think that nukes, it is, while one could argue that they may be clean, depending on your definition of nuclear waste, they're certainly not renewable. And they are also funded in New York State to the tune of about $7.6 billion in subsidies. So it is true that New York has an appetite for subsidizing electric power. And in this case, I think it is critical that we develop and spend our efforts in improving the infrastructure where the load is. And if we aren't able to improve the infrastructure where the load is to put the generation closer to the load, then we must absolutely increase our ability to distribute that energy from where it can be produced to where it's consumed. And obviously there are siting concerns about that, but this is an opportunity to really create lots of good paying construction jobs that cannot be outsourced. They have to be done here in New York State.
Well, thanks, Mark, and thank you for that insight, and we'll certainly follow up.
But we've got a good enough quorum, I think, to discuss the really important issue of, percentages in the basket of energy for New York State. We all agree that New York is is an energy intensive state, like many of them are, but not as intensive as some, where there are some industries. But it's very important to have clean, reliable energy. And one of the things that I've been wanted to get the Climate Action Council in discussion is what is the right mix at what time in New York's future. So here we are in 2020, say, what is it going to be in 2030? What is it going to be in 2040? What is it going to be in 2050? What is it going to be beyond that? When I think of infrastructure, I think of 100-year terms of infrastructure. We've got sewer systems that are 100 years old. We've got dams that are 100 years old. We've got highways that are 70 years old. Energy infrastructure is the same thing. And this is a great opportunity as we transition like I said before, I don't necessarily think that this is, the Climate Action Council. It should be the Energy Economy Transition Council. But everybody's got a part in it, and it's all about what's the right mix and the right percentage for the right time of day, the right time of year, the most efficient, because I'm all about energy efficiency. So I wanted to get the panel's thoughts on what they think the right mix of percentages is for the various areas. Mark, what should it be for solar? Why don't you start off?
Well, thanks you for that. And I really appreciate it. I meant to point this out earlier. I love the energy economy transition label for this group, because I think that's exactly where we are, and frankly, where we should be. I think we are at a crossroads where we need to transition our economy, and energy plays a huge role both in fueling that transition, but also in ultimately in modifying kind of the mix. So obviously I'm biased. Solar should be 100% of the mix, but I clearly understand that that's not realistic.
We know that's not going to happen, brother. The sun doesn't shine 24 hours a day. We've got winter.
We have winter, and we have night, and we also have energy storage and advancements we're making in energy storage, and the deployability and dispatchability of that, frankly, is becoming much more reliable and much more cost effective. But it is true that there is, in a state the size of New York, with the diversity that we have in load distribution, in population density, in usage, it is critical that we cover all those bases. And I feel quite honestly that, in my opinion, that decision has really already been made for us in the mandates that we now have at CLCPA. In terms of how solar can play a role in that, I think that despite some of the land use issues that we're facing, it is dispatchable today. It is a proven technology that is reliable today, and with the addition of smart storage and frankly giving the utilities the ability to improve their grid, particularly with regard to not only the ability to have more penetration of distributed energy, but to have more control over how that is dispatched, is crucial to any mix of new energy that we bring on. And I think that that's largely being hodgepodge installed now, because as we do it today, the project that causes the upgrade has to pay for it, and wherever that upgrade is best suited to help that project, but not necessarily best suited to help that substation or that circuit or that area. I think there has to be a more holistic approach there.
Let me break over to Tracy.
I had a couple questions for each of you. Hopefully I can get to them. First, Mark, I appreciate what you're doing. I've been to solar farms and talked with solar officials. And then one question I had for you that I heard there was problems at the time, I wonder if it's improved based on your experiences, that that you had the ability to put it out there, but getting connected to the grid, that it was problems with utilities, but getting interconnected to the grid. Has that improved, or are you still experiencing any problems with that?
I appreciate that question, Pomsano, and I appreciate your thoughts throughout the day about solar and siting and some of the issues. In terms of connection to the grid, I would say that our interactions with the grid, which is primarily in National Grid's territory and NYSEG as well, has improved dramatically over the past several years. However, I would point out that the challenges that we now are facing are challenges regarding upgrade costs. So in order to increase the penetration of distributed energy, and I think it's important to make a distinction between the large scale renewable projects that often get confused with projects like the ones that we do, which are community solar and connected to the distribution grid, whereas the large scale projects are connected to the transmission grid. But largely what we're seeing now, particularly in areas of upstate where there is room and good citable project sites to be connected to the grid, we're starting to hit penetration levels at certain substations and circuits that won't allow us to connect to the grid for a reasonable upgrade cost. In other words, an upgrade cost that would allow that project to proceed just due to sheer economics.
Great, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I was wondering if that system of interconnectivity is improved, so I'm glad to hear that.
But my question really is on solar. And again, in my capacity as supervisor of the town of Bedford, I was intent on wanting to see us do more, do our part. And we entered into a power purchase agreement with Lodestar and is NYPA that helped put that together, in which we had a long-term contract to buy a portion of the output of a large solar farm in Tioga County that I think now may have been completed. And the town of Bedford, which actually has pretty large electricity needs because of operating a water filtration plant and other facilities, would be a purchaser that helping it with the financing of it, because now they've got a purchaser for some 25 years. But my question really goes beyond how you incentivize not simply municipalities, but other large users to take a look at ways in which they can benefit by stable pricing of electricity and enter into such agreements. What can we do to make it more attractive, or at least let them know that these opportunities exist? How much of this is a matter of educating them on the opportunities that are available? How much of it is a matter of changing the structure or changing the incentives, changing VETR, whatever you think may be the way to make this work better than it's working now? I'd appreciate your thoughts on that.
I'll certainly take a stab at that, Burdick. I appreciate that question. I think that the real answer is a simple one. I think that there is currently a tremendous amount of desire and potentially demand, particularly from the municipal community and larger commercial energy users, that simply cannot be met under the current economic framework of how solar is implemented, certainly at the distribution level. And frankly, it remains to be seen whether large-scale solar projects will in fact be profitable or not. I think there's a real missing component of long-term revenue stability for these projects. Like any infrastructure project, any power generation project, these are relatively low returns over long periods of time. So you have to have some stability and some insight into the future economics to make the large investments that are required in the near term. And in fact, I applaud your efforts with the Westchester CCA. We've had conversations with them in the past. I know they just put out an RFP that we would love to respond to. The unfortunate reality is that we can't build enough projects economically to satisfy that need. And that is the fundamental challenge that we're having right now. I think the declining megawatt block incentive program, where you're incentivizing capacity, was a good program, but I think it has run its course. I strongly encourage looking at a revenue-based model, whether that be a feed-in tariff, or in the near term, we can solve that by changing the environmental value in the value stack. Currently, distributed energy projects get less than full retail value when they create a clean kilowatt hour. So, for example, upstate, the value stack revenue right now is about 8 cents. Retail energy is hovering anywhere between 10 and 12 cents, depending on the region that you're in. So you're already not getting a full retail value for that kilowatt hour. And then you have to create savings for the customer. At the end of the day, it's really about economics. Large energy buyers simply are not going to pay more because the energy's clean. Now, with the implementation of a carbon tax, that may very well change, right? If they're penalized for using carbon energy, there may be increased demand for renewables, which is even more imperative that we build an infrastructure where we can connect these types of projects, easy to deploy, simple technology, not super capital intensive compared to others like nuclear and some other technologies that are being discussed. Frankly, we have to invest in that infrastructure, in a smart grid, storage systems where we can go deploy solar on the scale that we can do. We can do this. We just absolutely have the capability and the willpower to do it. And the energy users, frankly, want it, but they can't make the economic justification for frankly incentivizing that or subsidizing it out of their own pocket.
Well, so you're saying either a carbon tax or taking another look at the value stack. It sounds as though it's stacked against the renewable solar from the way you've described the costs upstate. It doesn't sound like it's even a level playing field when it comes to solar produced energy. Am I understanding that correctly?
You are. That's absolutely the statement. That's really what we're trying to bring to everyone's attention. Largely, other power sources that are subsidized have been previously subsidized over decades, have kept power prices low. The vast majority of your electric bill for a kilowatt hour is transmission constraints. And so the ability to produce power cheaply is not at issue. Solar can do that. It's the compensation level at which we value that clean energy injected into the grid. And there's lots of good discussion we can have about valuing that where it's needed. But I think that right now it is so hodgepodge that we're putting projects where we can and not necessarily where we should. And I think that conversation has to include the utilities, and it has to include the large power users, particularly at the commercial scale. And municipalities are absolutely included in that discussion.
Well, I'd be very interested in continuing the conversation offline. Maybe if you could put your contact info in the chat, I'll follow up with you on it. Thanks very much.
I'd be happy to do that. Thank you.